Spoiler alert.
Undeniably, House of the Dragon is one of the biggest TV shows out right now, doing the seemingly impossible at getting people excited again in the Game of Thrones universe after the disastrous final season of that show. It's lucky that this is a prequel and can therefore avoid a lot of the fallout from Game of Thrones. However, it's not all smooth sailings with House of the Dragon. Despite being both critically acclaimed and a hit with audiences, there is one major criticism that is often levied at this series, and it's that the characters kind of suck. Okay, I'm being a little hyperbolic, but overall the sentiment is that the characters just aren't as memorable or likeable as the ones from the show's predecessor. Game of Thrones was able to get you to care about so many members of its cast, even about characters from opposing sides. My favourite character in Game of Thrones was Jaime Lannister, a character who spent a lot of time opposing the quote-unquote good guys of the series. The first major evil act in the show is committed by Jaime when he famously pushes Bran out of the tower window, crippling him for life and turning him into the most mundane, boring bastard to ever live. And yet all Jaime had to do was take a bath, say a few words and fall asleep, and hey presto, he was my favourite character. Jaime is just an example. That's ignoring the likes of Tyrion, Jon Snow, Robb Stark, Ned, Arya, Oberyn Martell, the Hound, Bronn, Varys, Daenerys, Brienne of Tarth, that one wildling guy with a very prominent beard. Even the characters you're meant to dislike, like Cersei, Joffrey, Tywin and the Night King, were all still big draws and massive presences in their own right. House of the Dragon may have a similar big budget and political intrigue, but its characters lack the same staying power and iconicness of those present in Game of Thrones. Now of course there are still some brilliant characters in House of the Dragon. I really like Rhaenyra and her son Viserys, and I find Daemon to be very interesting, although I will admit that a lot of that is to do with the fact that he's played by Matt Smith, and the Whovian in me would always be excited to see him in anything. But outside of those three, and a few others, none of the characters in House of the Dragon can hold a candle to the ones present in Game of Thrones, and there's probably quite a few reasons for that. Firstly, House of the Dragon lacks a lot of the humour that made Game of Thrones so enjoyable to watch, even in its more expository scenes. Bronn, for example, was a bit of a douchebag if we're being honest, but he could surely liven up a scene with some of his charm. Characters that make us laugh are few and far between in House of the Dragon. Then there's the fact that Game of Thrones is based on a series of novels, whilst House of the Dragon is based on the book Fire and Blood. This isn't a novel, but instead a fictional history book, meaning that the events that occur in the book are told from the perspective of an in-universe maester. There are even multiple sources in the book that contradict one another. This means that there isn't much in the way of reliable characterization for House of the Dragon to take inspiration from, whereas Game of Thrones had a better framework to work from. And the other issues that we end up jumping around in time so much for the first season, that the actors playing the characters were changing so often that it became harder to truly form connections with them. There are probably other reasons that people can point out, but those are the three that really stick out for me. However, these three issues, and the fact that the characters pale in comparison to their predecessor, could not stop me from loving Viserys Targaryen, as played beautifully by the exceptionally talented Paddy Considine. Even after 2 seasons, I still regard Viserys as my personal favourite character, and I think the reason why is very simple. He was just a good man who was simply trying his best. House of the Dragon details the events that resulted in the civil war known as the Dance of the Dragons, as well as the splitting in two of the Targaryen house, something which leads to the dramatic decline of the Targaryens as showcased by Daenerys' situation in Game of Thrones. The reason I like Viserys so much is because whilst being somewhat responsible for that civil war, he wants nothing more than to keep the peace and prevent infighting within his own family. He may not be perfect and does make some bad decisions, but he ultimately tries to be a good king and just a good person in general. And in a series where everyone is constantly at each other's throats and everyone is trying to get ahead of one another and there's loads of backstabbing and whatnot, it meant that I was able to really connect with Viserys. And even though House of the Dragon repeatedly tries to tell us otherwise, I genuinely think that Viserys was a better choice for king than Rhaenys. You'll hear it said many a time that the best choice for a leader is someone who doesn't actually want to lead, and Viserys did not want to be king, but still did his utmost to do right by the realms. Rhaenys wanted to be queen, and it's why she was so initially willing to allow her husband to try and take as much control and power as he could, something which led to the downfall of the Velaryons. In fact, Rhaenys throughout this series has basically just done what other people wanted her to do. She let her husband carry out all of his plans, even being willing to essentially sell off her 12-year-old daughter if it resulted in their family gaining more power. In the first season, she throws her support behind Rhaenyra, even though she suspects her of being responsible for Laena, her son's death. Only doing this because Rhaenyra asked her to. Her original plan was completely different. She was going to lay her own claim to Driftmark and finally be a true ruler, but was sweet-talked out of it. She even ultimately ends up supporting Rhaenyra in the Civil War, even though Corlys is more than willing to give up on all the power struggles after seeing what it has done to his family. My point is that we never really saw Rhaenys ever actually lead. She always seemed to just support or follow someone else's wishes. Heck, I'd even say that Alicent felt like more of a natural leader than Rhaenys at times. Yes, Rhaenys does lead Driftmark in her husband's absence, but it's not like we see much of that. Could Rhaenys have been a better ruler than Viserys? Absolutely, but I always just found it a bit annoying how adamant people were that she would have been, considering that the show never actually presented any evidence, as far as I'm concerned, that she was a better fit than Viserys. It was especially strange when it came from characters who had very little interaction with Rhaenys. And then there's the most important fact that Viserys' rule was one of relative peace and prosperity. Of course, Viserys could often be led astray and was at many times at the mercy of the whims of others, but he did lead in this series. He listened to others but still made his own decisions and did tell Rhaenyra that she had to do certain things regardless of how it made her feel. Viserys also removed Otto Hightower as Hand, a decision which I initially thought was a bad one, but ended up being the best thing that he could have done in the situation given Otto's hidden, self-serving agenda. And Lionel Strong was truly the best choice as he genuinely did support Viserys. Viserys was many things and a good king was definitely one of them. I might have spoken about that a little too long, but it was always something that personally irked me. Considering it was so clear and obvious that Rhaenys was a better fit, I feel that the show ultimately failed to put that across, especially when Rhaenys failed to end the war when she could have, simply because it wasn't her place to do so. Like, come on, you couldn't have weighed up the pros and cons of killing the usurpers right then and there, and then just blast them, potentially saving many lives down the line. Oh, it would have been wrong to do so, but it's perfectly okay to kill all those peasants as you and your dragon burst into the room. Yeah, that sounds about right. I don't think that Rhaenys is a bad character, by the way. It probably sounds like I hate her. It's just that sometimes I feel like the show would put her on a pedestal. But we're not here to talk about Rhaenys, we're here to talk about Viserys, and whilst he may have been a good man and a good king, and as good of a father as he probably could have been in the world of Game of Thrones, those things aren't what made him a true powerhouse of a character, in my opinion. What did was his slow downfall and declining health. Throughout his time on House of Dragon, Viserys was very slowly dying. Time would pass quite quickly on this show, yet whilst characters like Daemon and Sir Criston Cole wouldn't age a day, Viserys looked like he had spent those intervening years bathing in acid. He was falling apart, yet even when he was in that state, he was still doing his best, holding on for so long. And it all culminates in episode 8, where Viserys gets two of the strongest scenes in the entire show. The first is when he enters the throne room to resolve the issue over who should rule Driftmark in Corlys' absence. This scene was so badass. Usually that statement would be reserved for action scenes or someone finally defeating their enemy, not some old man struggling to get up some stairs. But that's really how this scene came across to me. Viserys may have been a shambling corpse, looking like he was an extra off The Walking Dead, but he still conveyed the power of the king. He was the only person in this series who could change the entire atmosphere of a room. The only person who could have people from opposing sides bend the knee. That's what I mean by him being a true ruler. Everyone in that throne room instantly changed their attitude and behaviour when he walked in, even though he was barely hanging on. Even Daemon, of all people, was affected by Viserys' entrance, and the sight of him helping his brother up those steps to the chair is one of the most memorable moments in House of Dragon. Watching as Daemon picked up the crown, the one thing that he has always desired, place on his brother's head with no malice or jealousy, and instead demonstrate pure brotherly love, was incredible to see. We can add being one of the few people Daemon actually cared about to the list of positives about Viserys. What also makes this scene great is how Viserys responds to the conflict. Corlys Velaryon is considered to most likely be gone for good, so a new ruler is required. Daemon Velaryon, Corlys' brother, wishes to take the throne and keep true Velaryon blood at the head of Driftmark, whilst Rhaenyra, the other claimant, wants Viserys to become Lord of Driftmark as Corlys had wished. Viserys ends up ignoring both of them and instead states his confusion over why they're discussing this when the succession had seemingly already been settled long ago. And instead, he asks Rhaenys to speak as she would know Corlys' wishes better than anyone. He filters out the noise and arguments, including putting aside his feelings for his own beloved daughter, and solves the issue in a matter of seconds. Even in a state of pure agony, his mind watered down by consistent use of milk of the puppy, he spoke with the tongue of the king, and everyone listened. He did not act in self-interest, but truly carried out his ruling in a way that he believed was as impartial as he could have been in this room where everyone is each other's brother and uncle and husband. Had Rhaenys gone against Corlys' wishes, then I truly think that Viserys would have still acted impartially and made a ruling that he deemed to best serve the realm and what Corlys had initially wanted. This was the last day that Viserys would be alive, and yet he still had the fire of a dragon coursing through his veins. The other scene that cemented him as the GOAT is his speech at the supper table later in the episode. Firstly, what a performance from Paddy Considine. He's a great actor, and I have seen him in projects before this, but I think from now on, he'll always be Viserys to me. There is so much anguish in his voice, as he pleads desperately for his family to get along, for there to be peace, not just in the realm, but in his own family tree. Viserys had always put his duties before his family, although he'd always tried to keep his family happy too, but here, he pleads for them to accept one another, not for the safety of the realm, not for each other, but for him. Watching them squabble over the crown and succession is killing him, and he can't bear it. They are all his family, and he wants nothing more than for them all to be happy with one another, and to be open and honest with each other. No more politicking, no more waiting until he's dead to then start stabbing each other in the back, but instead just sit together, eat a meal, and be happy. It's why he removes his mask to show his destroyed face. They are to see him and accept him, warts and all. He so desperately wishes that they would do the same for one another, to open up and remove their masks. It's an extremely moving, well written and brilliantly acted speech. Not only does it affect the viewer, but the characters too. You can see that his words have had an impact on all of them. Again, even Daemon looks like he wants to make amends. Honestly, had Viserys not died after this speech, I genuinely think that him and Daemon would have begun repairing their relationship, especially as Daemon seems to be more reflective of his behaviour now. Viserys was such a strong character in this show, and Paddy Considine injected him with so much gravitas and grace. He was a truly compelling character, and it's hard not to think what if with Viserys. What if he hadn't been ill? What if he had survived one more day? What if Viserys' first wife hadn't died? What if Daemon hadn't been such a dick? These are all things that are hard not to contemplate when it comes to his character. And that's because even in such a short amount of time, you really do become invested in this character. House of the Dragon may arguably have a character problem, but Viserys certainly isn't one of them, and his absence has left a huge hole in this series. However, that is only what I think. What about you? What do you think about both House of the Dragon and Viserys? Is he your favourite character too? If not, then who is? If I'm being completely truthful, I'd say that Rhaenyra is most likely to be the best character in the series, but Viserys will always be my favourite. So I won't be surprised if many of you end up really praising her character. And about Rhaenys, do you think I was too hard on her? Would she have actually been a better ruler than Viserys? Was Viserys undeserving of the crown? And how does House of the Dragon compare to Game of Thrones for you? Personally, I think Game of Thrones is better, but if House of the Dragon has a somewhat decent ending, then I think it will end up being the better show, basically by default. But these are questions for you to consider and answer in the comments below. And whilst you're down there, do be sure to give this video a like. It really helps me out and gives the video a big boost. And if you really want to make me happy, then do consider subscribing. I would love to have you be a part of this channel. But anyway, I will leave you now. Thank you so much for watching this video, I really appreciate it, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye bye.
The crown cannot stand strong if the House of the Dragon remains divided. But set aside your grievances, if not for the sake of the crown, and for the sake of this old man, who loves you all so dearly.